Thanks for coming to church on Super Bowl Sunday. I've joked before that this Super Bowl Sunday in America is the most important religious holiday. And I told Reverend that I was becoming a Jodo Shinshu ascetic. I scheduled my class today on Super Bowl Sunday. Oh my God. And my son is like, "You're not my father anymore." He said, "How could you possibly do that?" And I told him I forgot. And he said, "Forget? How can you forget?" So today I wanted to talk about narratives, Buddhist narratives. There's lots of narratives in our culture. It's a way of looking at the world and the way we orient ourselves in life. So for example, the Republicans try very hard to create a narrative, and Democrats try to create a narrative. So kind of fun.
I think it's on.
Huh?
I blanked it.
Oh, okay. Okay, good. Okay, now we're rolling. I was stalling for time. So, narratives, this is a word that's used a lot, creating narratives. And it used to only have to do with stories or fiction, but it's the way we look at the world, it's the way we cognize things. We don't realize it, but we kind of choose the narratives to which we align our lives with. And like reading the Three Treasures, that's a proposed narrative that you take refuge, and that becomes the focus of your life. And when you live that narrative, your life changes, just like with any narrative. And the other thing that's funny is I put my first slide up, and Sandy works at Costa Mesa, Maricosta College. The first thing she said was, "You spelled narrative wrong." See, this is why I'm inherently not a good speller, because that looks wrong to me. It seems like it should have one R, I don't know why it has two R's in a row. But Sandy's right, I immediately changed it. So in our tradition of Buddhism, Pureland Buddhism, we have these grand stories about Amida Buddha, and there's a seeker called Dharmakara, and his name becomes Namo Amida Butsu. And in America, if you have a religious text, we tend to read it in two different ways. It's either factually, historically true, or it's completely false. And that's hard for Buddhists, because most of our stories are not historically true, but they're spiritually true. They carry deep spiritual meaning, but they didn't literally happen. And so sometimes what ministers do, I've been trying to find a middle of the road between these extremes of factually true or false. And a lot of times we'll say, well, they're a myth, like Romeo and Juliet. But one of the troubles with that is everything becomes a metaphor in the story for something else. So everything's really a placeholder for some doctrinal thing. And so you're still kind of subverting the depth and meaning of the story to placeholders for something to do with text and doctrine and rules. So one scholar I read the other day, I found a paper on the internet. It's by Luis Gomez. He says that you can read Buddhist sutras as literally the way a Buddha sees the world. That these are Buddhist narratives that are trying to create a vista of how the world looks through the eyes of someone who practices. And I thought that was a really nice way of finding a middle between these extremes. So I'd kind of like to show you some, we're going to start with a popular narrative in our culture. I'm going to give you a narrative that I lived out my freshman year in high school, and then we're going to get to the Buddhism part. So this movie just came out, I think, like in around December time, and I saw it and I loved it. I thought it was great. I really, really liked it. A lot of old school Star Wars people had troubles with it, I'm an old school Star Wars person too. I saw the original in like 1977, but I thought it was great. I tried to go in with no expectations, and I really liked it. I thought it was fantastic. So, so some of the key characters in this film is Luke Skywalker on the left, that kind of represents light and the power of the Force. And then we have Kylo Ren on the right, which is kind of, his narrative is the dark side, right? He follows the dark side. And then you've got Rey kind of in the middle, struggling to find her own path. And, you know, these characters kind of mirror the original Star Wars for me. You have Yoda, the profound teacher. And I made some mistakes when I gave this talk at OCBC, and all the Star Wars people came and corrected me. So I love Star Wars, but I'm not a groupie. Yoda was not the teacher of both Obi-Wan Kenobi and Darth Vader. I made a mistake. Yoda was only the teacher of Obi-Wan Kenobi. But there's Obi-Wan Kenobi on the left, who becomes Luke Skywalker's teacher, and then Darth Vader on the right. And, you know, Darth Vader and Obi-Wan Kenobi were friends until Darth Vader went to the dark side. And Yoda tries to teach the path of wisdom and light and interconnectedness. So I think this is where I might have also made a mistake. I can't remember if it was the first movie or the second movie. They go to the Dagobah system, and I incorrectly said Tatooine. And I got everybody at church came up to me and said it was Dagobah. It was Dagobah. Everybody knows it was a Dagobah system. So they're at the Dagobah system, and Yoda is trying to teach Luke Skywalker about the power of the Force. And he tries to get Luke to move rocks with his mind, because everything's interconnected. And Luke becomes very frustrated. And he says it's too hard, it's too much. And at the end of the scene, Yoda shows him the power, and then Luke Skywalker says, I can't believe it. And Yoda said, yes, and that's why you fail. Because he doesn't believe in the narrative. So I just wanted to show you this. So Yoda is a profound teacher, and he's trying to get Luke to see the world through the eyes of a Jedi Master. And if he can see that narrative and he trusts the narrative, then he masters and changes his life. If he doesn't believe it, then it really is not true. So narratives are very powerful. So this is the title from that paper I found on the internet. And this is one of the hardest papers I have ever read. I read it 3 times. The first time I read it, and I didn't understand it. The second time, I highlighted the bits that I did understand. And then the third time, I just read the highlights. And it was pretty good. So this is the title, On Reading Literature Literally. And I thought, oh, I'm going to totally disagree with this guy. How can you read the larger sutra literally? But he's saying, you want to take concrete imagery over or before doctrine. So rather than mapping everything to a doctrinal point, you want to take that imagery concretely and see it through those eyes and have it affect the way you live. So he calls Buddhism is a religion of narrative, much more than it is a religion of doctrine. It's a narrative religion. It's giving us narratives to orient our lives. And see, Sandy was right, there is 2 R's there. See, as a math major, I only know how to spell X, Y, and Z. So I want to show you a narrative, an experience that I went through in high school. This is a true story. So I did not like math very much. My freshman year at West High School in Torrance, I had Algebra 1 with a football coach, one of my football coaches. His name was Max Lomas. He was from Alabama. He was great. I tried to get through my math education with as little work as possible. And I tried to get by also on my charms and good looks. So I always did the minimum amount of work possible to pass. And I was highly anxious. I was very nervous, but I really didn't invest very much. I thought math was dumb. It's very hard. Nobody gets it. And so the first semester, so first and second quarter, I was able to get 2 B's. So the first semester, I got a B in Algebra 1. And my mom and dad were pretty happy. I was pretty happy. You know, and I must have been pretty good at math because I barely tried and I got a B, but it was close. So the third quarter, I think I did even less because I figured I didn't do that much and I got a B. I could probably do less and still get a B. Well, I took this test that third quarter, well, a long time ago this month, probably, and we had 10 questions like this that said solve. Solve this equation. So a big thing here is the word solve and equal to 0. That's a huge giveaway. It's very important. But I didn't study very much, and I was kind of skating my way through. So I kind of saw the problem this way. Factor. Factor. So what I did on all 10 problems is I did this. I factored, this is a quadratic equation. I factored it. And so you have x minus 1 times x minus 4, and it has to equal 0. And I did all the problems that way, and I was only half done. You know, details make a big difference in life. I got half credit on every question because I made this little mistake. So I ended up getting a D or a C. I think I got a C. So what you're supposed to do is, this thing can be 0 if x minus 1 is 0 or if x minus 4 is 0, right? If either one of those is 0, the 0 times anything is 0. So what I was supposed to do, I was supposed to do this. And then you're supposed to say, well, what minus 1 is 0? 1. And what minus 4 is 0? So what I was supposed to do is I was supposed to write this down, but I didn't. So even though I was a football player in high school and Coach Lomas was a high school football coach, I got a C on this, and I always thought it was really unfair. And I knew my dad was going to be upset with me. So I had to prepare my dad for the incoming C. And it wasn't that C's are bad, but he knew that just goofing around, I could get a B. And so I knew he was going to be unhappy. So I went to my father, and this was the narrative. Math is hard. It's very hard. I find it very difficult. And it is very hard if you don't go to class, you don't do your homework, and you don't study. The tests are a lot harder. I also told him no one can do it. No one in the class. No one. The only person that can do it, but there's nobody. Everybody's failing. I also said that math is really, really unfair because I made this little mistake. I factored instead of solved. So I get half wrong on every question. That's really unfair. And after I gave this talk at OCBC, there's a father who teaches at Cal State Long Beach. And he came up to me and he said, "Oh, you totally deserved a C." I was like, all right, let's not pile on. So this was my father's narrative. He was very calm. I was 14 years old. So I said, math is hard. He said, it's really easy if you study. And I was like, okay, I'll give you that one. And then I said, no one can do it. And he said, well, all the B students are doing it. All the A students are doing it. I mean, isn't there people that are getting A's and B's in your class? I went, yeah, but I don't hang out with those people. All the bad students hang out together and we all tell each other how hard it is. And then I said, math is unfair. And he said, math is the most fair subject you can take. It's not like English. It's not like figure skating. It's not like gymnastics. It's not like history or philosophy. You either get the problem right or you get it wrong. It's the most fair subject there is. That's what's so beautiful about it. The teacher could really not like you. And if you say x is equal to 1 or x equals 4, you're going to get it right. So then, I still wasn't quite sold on my father's argument. So he had a fourth narrative point. He said, if you don't get a B for the semester, you're not playing football your sophomore year of high school. And that got my attention. And I found out later from my mom that he was bluffing. He wasn't going to go through with it. But see, I didn't know that. So she said that he never would have done it. But I believed he would. And I bought the narrative. And I started studying. And actually, one of the girls in the class that got A's in algebra, I started doing work with her over the phone. And I started learning the rules. And I found that math is, rather easy if you just know the rules. They apply to all the problems. You don't really have to do 1,000 problems. You just have to know 10 rules. And I started getting A's in Algebra 1. And I was able to go from a C to an A in the semester. And I started loving math. I went to UCLA and got a degree in mathematics. So this is like a pivotal point in my life. And it had to do with just changing narratives. And so, I really believed math was impossible. And it was. It really was. But when I changed the narrative, it was quite easy and fair, and I really liked it. There's an order to it. And also the other neat thing about math is if you're good at it and you know the rules, you don't spend as much time studying. You don't have to read 1,000 pages of Shakespeare, right? You just have to do 10 problems and generalize them to all problems, and you can go to the beach. So again, this essay, Luis Gomez, I think he just died this year. But he said that we really should think about reading Buddhist sutras literally as the way a devout Buddhist sees the world. It's a vista. They actually used the word vista, which I thought was very appropriate because we're at the Vista Buddhist Temple. But this is the vista of the world through the eyes of somebody who practices. Like Yoda sees the world much differently than Darth Vader. And he lives it. And I also thought it was very interesting that he mentioned that we should take the imagery concretely rather than just saying it's a placeholder for doctrine. So, one thing we do if we say it's a metaphor, we say, oh, I've said this before, the main character in the larger sutra is playing the role of Buddha nature, right? So that's what I'm doing. I'm taking the imagery and I'm just kind of mapping it to doctrinal points. But he's saying, no, you're missing the view of what the world looks like from somebody who practices Buddhism. You should take the imagery more concretely and not immediately fall back on doctrine, which is what we do in the West. Buddhism tends to be philosophical. So this is one of the quotes from the paper, one of the few that are in yellow. It says, regarding the Pure Lands and the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas that inhabit them, I wonder if it's possible to understand the universe they occupy as the true representation of an objective world as seen through the eyes of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. So that's kind of in a nutshell what his paper's about. And Bishop Umezu, at our Hondo dedication, he said almost exactly this. He said, the Pure Land is real and true, right? This magical world of the Buddhas is what's literally true. And our suffering and our frustration and this narrative of anxiety is what's false. And so he's mimicking this idea. So, we can say this is a symbol of awakening, or sometimes we say this is a symbol of ultimate truth, but this is the way one becomes, or the way the world looks. People look this way to us when we're humble and we have gratitude and we practice. And this is, we say Namo Amida Butsu, and oftentimes we say this is the actual sound of enlightenment, that when your ears are open and you are living a spiritual narrative, you can hear the Dharma in everything. And that is literally true. So I wanted to give you this last quote. This is by another really famous Buddhist scholar that I like a lot. He lived in Japan. I think he died in the 70s. His name's Roijin Soga. And this is a very famous quote. It's almost like a Zen koan coming from the Pureland tradition. He says, we do not believe in Buddha or God because they actually exist. They exist because we believe in them. So I'm not going to explain this to you. You have to think about this a lot. But this is this idea of narrative. I think the power of narrative. So there's a couple messages here. You should see Star Wars. You should study your math, and it will be very easy, and you'll get A's. And the Pure Land teachings are not placeholders for doctrine. They're describing a narrative or a vision of the world that we try to live by. Okay. Please join me in Gassho.